So again, welcome to FOIA Friday. I'm bringing you tips, tricks, and all the inspiration you can need for your FOIA requests. And hopefully I'm here to answer questions as well. And yeah, without any further ado, I'm going to kick it off and get started. Um, Today we are doing 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes. If you were on our last call, that was a part of a question that I asked the group, a poll I ran in the call to see what people wanted to talk about on the next FOIA Friday. I had like five different options. The two most answered options of those five were 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes in do-it-yourself litigation. So how to represent yourself if you're looking to appeal a FOIA request, not just administratively, but in court. I think that'll also be an awesome webinar. I'm working on some research for that. I'm going to be talking to more experts in the next couple months, and I'm hoping to do that one either in December or January. So stay tuned for that. That will not be the next FOIA Friday that we have, but it'll be coming up. So if you voted for that option, it's coming. If you voted for FOIA Friday, here we are. Um, I'm also going to drop the link in the chat to the November and December FOIA Fridays. Instead of the last Friday of the month, those are going to be somewhere in the middle of the month just to avoid the holidays coming up. So you can go ahead and get registered for those if you haven't yet. Today, I'm going to start off, instead of going through our normal template, I'm going to start off with questions and then move into the 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes. But I'm going to share my screen and just show you all, for anyone who's new on the call, what our usual template and order of operations is. So usually when we start the call, we have a tip sheet here that I go through. We do a roll call. You can see this one's from August 30th. So we don't have one today because the slides have tons of links, and I'm sure that's going to be enough for you all. But usually we go through a tip sheet. People who are attending the call write their names in. I go through an agenda, and then I have different kind of segments of the call, along with the topic of the week, where either I'm working through something or talking through something in the world of FOIA, or I brought a guest on to help us with that. And then in the end, we have more links and resources, and then a just a section for previous notes and recordings. So I'm going to drop this in the chat as well in case you're looking for previous notes and recordings. That's also on MuckRock. I think it's, let's see what it is. MuckRock FOIA Friday. It's not muckrock.com/FOIA Friday. I think it's a little bit more complicated URL. So we have muckrock/project/FOIA Friday. And then this 1172 is the link. I'm going to drop that in the chat as well. And all our previous FOIA Fridays are up there. So in lieu of going through this normal template that we would, I'm just going to start with some questions and then get to the 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes, because going through these 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes is going to be a marathon and a sprint at the same time. But I want to make sure we have some time to start off with some questions. And I think if Trenton Daniel is on the call, I also asked him to share some information from a recent FOIA officer meeting that he went to. So does anyone here have any questions they want to start off with before I get to the 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes?
I emailed you about one, Dillon.
Yes, Rebecca.
So,
I have looked at your question. I'm excited to talk to you about it. So uh,
uh,
fire away.
yeah, so I'm quite new to putting in a FOIA, because I'm British. You might have noticed. Um, but I'm working on a documentary that is US based. It's a podcast, and essentially it's an MK Ultra related one, which I know will have come up a lot for you guys.
Mhm.
But what we're trying to find out is whether it is links. Basically, we're trying to sort of follow some links. And what I found is that in the late 70s, when some of the information was kind of rediscovered, the finance kind of documents, there was 185 researchers and non-governmental staff who were identified being connected to the projects. But because of the privacy laws, their names were redacted from the documentations. They weren't kind of released. So I wanted to ask, because obviously quite a lot of those people are likely to have passed by now, or some will have, whether it's possible to see an unredacted list of those names, or a list of those names where the people who've died are now like visible.
Hmm.
I have no idea how to approach that. I have actually, since I sent you that email, I have found, like, because there is a big list of documents with Mori IDs.
Hmm.
I have found one which seems to look like it might contain those names
Okay.
in a document with a Mori ID. So I could obviously maybe at least direct in terms of one document now. Um, but if there was any kind of tips on how to approach that kind of question, that would be really, really helpful. And also, I wanted to ask them about if there are any documentation about subsequent projects, which, if there were any projects like MK Ultra that continued in different veins, because lots of researchers have told me that there were, but obviously, I'm not, if I just ask a very broad question, I've got a feeling I'm going to get told to go away. So, any ideas around framing any of those questions would be really useful.
Yeah, I think they're both great questions. I'll start with the first one, which is the question of the list of names that were originally redacted for people who have since passed, and you're wondering how to get those names now that the people have passed and likely they won't be redacted. Um, so it sounds like you found a single document with the whole, with or some are part of that list, correct?
Yeah, so I think it's maybe called the vault or something, but I saw also on one of someone else has obviously on MuckRock asked for MK Ultra documents, and in one of their replies they were sent this big 80-page document which has, here's all of the MK Ultra kind of documents, and they all have reference numbers and a brief description of what these documents are. So going through that 80-page list, I eventually found one that looks like it might be essentially this list of names. So I
Yeah.
can obviously ask to see that, but I would need to ask them to kind of redact the names who, not unredact the names who are no longer, like, who have since died.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's a pretty clear solution then. I think, especially if you have that actual document name, to just refile that same request and actually send along the document with the current redactions as they are and say exactly what you said, or if there's also statute, I'm not sure exactly how it would work or for these type of documents from what agency. It probably depends on what agency, how they defined what they share after how many years someone has died. I'm thinking of recently, I filed a request for documents from the National Military Personnel Archives in the United States. And they have their own specific time period where when someone hasn't died yet and you're not next of kin, you can only get the personnel files. But after X amount of years, you can request the whole folder. But it's up to that agency, or it's up to the archive who has defined after what amount of years you can have access to this larger amount of files on the person. So I assume it depends on the agency and like their own policies on how many years since someone's passed have to have passed, or how they define uh, unredacting things or releasing materials related to people who have since passed. Um, so I would find that for the specific agency you're filing for, or just get as close to that as you can. Then refile that request for the document that you do have and attach the document that you do have and say, I'm filing a request for this document. I understand it was fulfilled in whatever,
Yeah.
1999. And people have since likely passed according to your own policy, X, Y, or Z. This means that the redactions made in this document, or that this leads me to believe that the redactions made in this document wouldn't be made in fulfilling this request in 2024.
Yeah. I mean, I can't get hold of these particular document at the moment. It's more like it's listed on a list of documents. So I would need to say, look, here's a list of documents. You've supplied this list to other people asking
Yeah.
for stuff. It's this one, this number. and then yeah, go through all those sort of steps that you think. Yeah, it's the CIA, so I'll go and have a look and see um, what their policies are, or whether there's any information about how many years since.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And
Yeah.
just to ask more broadly about asking for CIA documents, do you really need to say, if you're just asking any documents pertaining to this, does that usually not get you anywhere? Do you need to be pretty specific?
You're gonna need to be more specific. How specific is difficult sometimes, and that's why I was thinking of your question, and I was thinking that FOIA Friday this week is 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes. So I'm going to go through how to phrase asking for a lot of different things, and you'll see in all these different phrasings, like toggling between being very specific and sometimes being a little bit more general. And it still works out. You don't always have to know exactly where everything is. That's one of the first kind of FOIA advice that people give will be is call the records custodian, know whose file cabinet it's in, know exactly what the file is called, and you should be able to like walk in and get it yourself, you know. That's really hard a lot of the time. Getting as close to that as possible is great, but often you won't be able to do that, or you might not be working with an agency that will spend enough time with you to show you where everything is and exactly what it's called. Um, but I'm wondering, my strategy would be if I were in your shoes, would be if you are starting to understand the types of documents or in that document list that you are looking at that could be kept on such a program, using that phrasing and terminology for asking for a broader set of documents on different types of programs in a specific time period. Like if there's one document that looks like it would be very general across one any program, that could probably be the starting block to say like all of these documents for such and such programs ran in this department of the agency in this small set of years. I would also choose a really small set of years just because that search will take a lot less time than a larger time period of years. And then that could help you narrow it down. And then if you get those back, then hopefully there's some more pieces of the puzzle in those documents that then you can then go back and start requesting more. But it would be, I think, about finding a couple different names for types of documents you think they had to have had on different programs in that time period. Um,
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful. Thank you.
you're welcome.
It's been a learning curve. I've spent a lot of time on your website.
Yeah, it's always a learning curve, but do bring back your challenges and successes with this to me and to FOIA Friday, because I'll be interested to hear what you learn. And on MuckRock, we've just had so many requesters filing with the FBI and CIA, and we've done a lot of work on that in previous iterations of the editorial team that I'm on. I myself haven't worked really closely with the FBI or CIA on any requests, and so I'm not as familiar. But I know we have a lot of resources on it, and there are people on my team who have more of that kind of institutional knowledge than I do, so I can always pose some questions to them as well.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Mhm. Um, Trent Daniel is on the call now, and I was talking to someone at MuckRock who told me that Trent Daniel was at a FOIA officer convening or something of the sort recently. And I thought it would be interesting if Trenton shared a little bit of what was going on there, what he learned, and just gave us a little bit of insight. So, Trenton, if you have time and you can unmute right now, I'm going to call on you to tell us a little bit about where you were and what was going on there.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me, Dillon. Sorry, I've been running. Just got through with a PT appointment. But yeah, so I got this invite to come from this conference, or to attend this conference in DC, that was given by FOIA officers, and so it was an afternoon presentation, and they had multiple people just giving these brief introductions to their software that they're using for fulfilling FOIA requests. And I should say that the title of this conference was about using like FOIA and AI, which was kind of misleading, although they do use software for fulfilling these FOIA requests. And so I was interested in attending that for two reasons. One was like I'm interested in kind of like the mindset of these FOIA officers. FOIA agencies are notoriously and ironically opaque, and I wanted to know more about just like who are these people who are FOIA officers? Surely there must be a community of FOIA officers. What does that look like? And so one of the things I've been eager to do is treating, the FOIA community as a bit of a beat, like learning more about the motives, kind of like what gets FOIA officers up in the morning, what makes them really excited, and then and I'll get back to that. And then the second thing I'm interested in is just learning more about the software that FOIA officers are using to fulfill these requests. So when they're talking about, oh, this request is really onerous, and this could take forever for us to fulfill, I mean, like it helps to know what kind of software they're using, because it could just take a matter of minutes for them to fulfill the request. And I mean, not obviously the records still need to be reviewed by legal, but it helps to know what they're using, and there are more and more pieces of software that are being used to fulfill these requests. So yeah, that's why I went, and it turned out I was not the only reporter at this conference. Nate Jones was there as well, which was interesting. So I would advise everyone on this call to, if they haven't already, just to kind of like think about, what these FOIA officers are seeking, what they expect and request. And obviously, to your point earlier, Dillon, talking about requesters being really, really specific and trying to figure out a balance between being specific and maybe not being as specific. But yeah, I think I'm still trying to learn more from kind of like what the FOIA agency world is like, and like many of them are commiserating over the influx of requests that they received, and they've certainly seen a spike in recent years, much of done by, I guess you could say, activists. So yeah, you have any questions?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know when you said the title was FOIA and AI basically, but the actual content of the conference wasn't necessarily AI. It was more just about tools and software in general, even if it didn't involve any actual AI or machine learning of any type.
Yeah. So there was one vendor who gave a presentation about, they're trying to fulfill as many requests as possible. And there's, government agencies are using more, different types of computers that are now subject to public records laws. So, so an example would be parking lot footage, as they call it. So you could submit a request for, let's say there's a shooting, and then there's a public facility near the shooting, then you could submit a request with that agency, and you could get that surveillance footage. And so these vendors are using this software, they're selling this software so that they can go through the footage, and if possible, if there's people's faces, they could blur out those faces. So essentially, they're using the software to redact video or surveillance footage.
Yeah.
And I guess more, and it's more common than I had thought it was. I've been putting in FOIA requests for Zoom videos with federal agencies, thinking that these meetings would be recorded, and one would think that they should be, because not everyone is able to participate. But as I've learned, not all these meetings are recorded, and so they're using these. They're using the software to be able to go through all this video footage. to redact if necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's a situation, I mean, especially with video and hours of video, I think from what I've been reading, and I'll link in the chat as well, this is really interesting to me what Trent and Daniel was saying because uh we I think Trent asked this question probably in a FOIA Friday about 4 months or so to me or to the group about what anyone knew about FOIA officers or federal FOIA agencies using AI in any way. And then I found a question that kind of directly and indirectly deals with this in the Chief Officer FOIA reports that federal agencies are asked to fulfill in every year. And in 2023 and 2024, they started asking the question about what sorts of new technology, especially machine learning or automated processing, are your agency or is your agency using right now? And then about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think, we published this article on MuckRock with a little assignments tool to try to crowdsource folks to help us review those reports and point out anything that might be interesting or less interesting in each report as we try to get an idea more broadly about what's in there for those 2 years. And we've had, I think, over 100 submissions at this point. We have 120 documents to go through, so we're almost there. Which has been awesome. I mean, the broader FOIA Friday, MuckRock, Data Liberation Project community has been super helpful in this sense because I could have tossed that into machine learning myself and said, tell me what the answers to this question is in every one of these documents. But it might not have actually told me the most interesting things. And I think getting actual human eyes on it, we've noticed places where agencies answer the question, but what they're answering is actually that they're not using AI, that they're just using Control F basically, but they still answer the question affirmatively because maybe these reports they have more to do with funding than is clear at the outset. And so saying you're using new technology and kind of dressing it up a little bit in the answer to the question is a better way to answer it than to say, no, we're not using any new technology. Don't give us more money for new technology. So yeah, we're still working on that and we're going to publish the results or what we found so far. Different agencies seem to be using really widely different tools. A lot of it is just basic discovery tools that may be building in some new AI processes or parts, like Trenton said, maybe for just massive amounts of video. But yeah, check out that article. We'll have more updates on it. If you want to contribute reviewing some of these reports and see what agencies are saying, that's there. But yeah, Trenton, thank you so much for sharing that. That is really interesting. I think everyone on this call is in the same mindset of wanting to get inside a FOIA officer's brain or get inside an agency's brain and see what's going on in every part of the request that you don't see. You see all these replies coming back and you see the end response, but it's just fascinating to try to learn a little bit more about what's going on the other side of that door once you ship off the request. So yeah, does anyone else have any other questions or thoughts for Trenton on that adventure?
One thing I would add real quick, and interesting what you said, Dylan, about that they that these agencies could be just saying they're using AI to, just to kind of dress up things up so that they can get funding to fulfill these requests, which would make sense with like what I saw at that conference.
Hmm.
But another thing I learned at the conference is that like federal agencies are using so many different kinds of software, and there isn't a single piece of software that these federal agencies are using. So it really varies. And then there's an agency like the DOJ, which I believe they're using Nuix, which is this extremely powerful piece of software, and really is as an example of machine learning. And they're able to do so much with this tool. And then there are other agencies that are using less sophisticated pieces of software to to fulfill these requests. And then, of course, that doesn't even take into consideration the what local agencies are using, which is probably Control F on emails.
Yeah.
And then maybe printing copies of the emails and then offering to fax them to you.
And I mean, I think the thing that is just so interesting is like everyone on this call has probably seen in the last 3 years of new AI tools changing almost every month or every week, it felt like for a while in 2023. There's just so much happening and everyone's scrambling to say, how do we do this in our job? That I think there's probably a lot that lots of FOIA officers could tell you is the general standard or way the direction is moving. But there's probably so many little initiatives or little attempts inside different agencies or departments to just like move as quick as they can to make use of whatever tools are being offered to them. Just like so many different fields are as they're trying to adapt as new tools seem to drop every week or there's a new model or there's a new this or that. So yeah, I will keep everyone here updated, and like I said, we'll be publishing some updates on what we found initially in those chief FOIA officer reports. But Vasant, you've been waiting a while, so go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks. Thanks for calling on me. Yeah, I guess Trent, my question was, I'm still new to the world of filing FOIA requests, but I'm just curious, what did you get a sense of? Is there a particular type of person that becomes a FOIA officer? Like, do they just get really excited by, quick 5 minute, requests? Like, what's kind of a peek inside their brain, if you will?
That's a really good question and one that I've been curious about as well. Um, I mean, I had this kind of stereotype in my head of what a FOIA officer was like, which is, I don't know, just this kind of faceless bureaucrat, um, which is not fair. But I imagine I mean, I don't know. I found everyone to be believe in open records and also really enjoy doing research and trying to figure out how to solve problems. And I believe that probably most people I met briefly were just really interested in making these records available to the public, contrary to what we may think sometimes. But yeah, that was and I mean, this was just an afternoon, and I had to leave to go catch my train, but I wanted to I just want to find out more, kind of like what's the FOIA community like, and like they have these conferences, and I mean, I think that there's kind of this as people who spend a lot of time with public records, there's kind of like this perception of tension when I don't think they're one exists in reality, if that makes sense. I thought that there would have been more reporters there who were trying to get just learn more about what these the technology, what FOIA officers are trying to do to do their jobs. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Adrian, I see you have a raised hand, but I want to make sure we get to 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes because now we're down to 50 FOIAs in 30 minutes. But I also love having these sorts of conversations. And the reason I asked Trenton to share this back to the group is I just think we have a lot of people on this call who know a lot about FOIA or a small part of about FOIA in their own world, in whatever ways that that comes up for them. And yeah, I just think anytime anyone has anything to share or we can get a conversation going amongst ourselves and not just me talking at all of you, I'm super excited by it because I know there are a lot of smart people with interesting ideas on this call, and it's just great to share amongst ourselves. So with that being said, yeah, Adrian for sure shared in the chat. I bet Tren or Vasant or whoever wants to continue that conversation will be happy to continue it there or in the MuckRock Slack, wherever else, or on another FOIA Friday. But I'm going to hop into the 50 FOIAs in 50 minutes portion of the call now. So let's see. All right. Here we go. I'm going to try to go through this quickly, but in enough detail that it's not just gibberish coming at you for the next 20 or so minutes, 30 minutes. I have these broken up into 5 groups. So we have policing as our first group, and then I think health and environment, and then housing, and then politics, and then sports, and then meta. Each grouping has, say, 1 to 10 requests. Policing has more, just because that's something I'm working on right now. All of these links go to either a MuckRock page, or about 90% of them, 95% of them, go to a MuckRock request that was fulfilled for this specific document or type of data. And if not, then it's probably a link to a GitHub or an article that says the exact thing that was requested itself. So I tried to get you as close to everything as possible. So feel free to click those. If you're on MuckRock, clone them. If you're not on MuckRock, copy and paste into your own email to send and make that request, or go through the portal that the agency asks you to. So for policing, we have these 15 requests, or these 15 things you can request. And I think kind of what I was saying at the top of the call is there's this tension between being as specific as you possibly can, and not working at the agency yourself and not knowing exactly where everything is. And so all of these things on this list look probably like, I don't know, like magic, to think that you could get all of these things, like a roster of forms, body-worn camera policies, incident reports, investigative materials. This is like, wow, I would be really like inside a police agency if I could get these things. But each of these is just a few words, and that's kind of what I'm trying to walk through today. And I have all the actual words on each page to show you that it's not magic. But I'm going to kind of go through some of them quickly, some of them a little bit more in depth than others. The first one is roster of forms, which I think is really exciting because Patrick Maynard, who I think was a reporter in the United States for a while and is now living in Berlin, started when he was in the United States, and he's been requesting these roster of forms, which is a great type of request to start with because it's a request about all the other things you can request. And these roster of forms he's gotten from several state agencies, state police agencies, and several local agencies across the country. And they are exactly what it sounds like, which is the list of forms that an agency holds, and that they would themselves file for different parts of their day-to-day work. So you can see here for New Mexico State Police, they have a badge ID application, a bereavement leave policy form, a credential sheet, a grievance complaint form. That sounds interesting. Job order forms, key requests, lost, worn, broken, or stolen property form. That's really interesting. I think this is a great place to start if you're interested in filing a request to a police agency in the United States. Go check out Patrick's rosters of forms, and if the agency you're interested in is not there, file that same request for your agency, and it'll help you get inside the mind of the agency and the types of documents or data that are being produced and all the daily activities that could lead you to the things that you're interested in. Then we have Brady or Giglio lists, and the disciplinary files associated with those. These are lists of untrustworthy cops who are who, when they are asked to testify in court, the defense has to receive the adequate documentation of why they may not be trustworthy. This stems from multiple cases that have kind of set the precedent that the prosecution has to share this information with the defense in court after several cases were completely changed when it wasn't. So these are basically do not call lists, or the kind of cops that a defense would want to know if they had lied a lot of times and been shown to be an officer that has had specific discipline or incidents for lying, that evidence would be necessary if the cop had claimed that they had found something on the client that they're now defending. What's really important or interesting is that it's difficult to get misconduct files from police agencies themselves, but if your district attorney office holds these materials or even holds a list on these types of police officers, that can be a way to get it quicker than if you went specifically to the police agency. Then we have body-worn camera policies and body-worn camera. An important thing to think through, no matter what you're doing in the world of FOIA or public records request, is what the agency should be doing and what you can get about what they're actually doing. And so with the taser policy and taser deployment log, use of force policy, use of force reports, each of these I put together because what you'll find, especially when you get body-worn camera, is maybe it's not turned on in the times you thought it would be for the incident that you requested for. Or maybe a taser was deployed 14 times in an arrest on someone, and you're like, oh my gosh, is that possible? Is that allowed? Or the use of force policy will tell you what sorts of use of force maybe these reports are filed for. So it's good to always think about the policy for the thing that you're requesting as well, so that you can assess what you get back. Each of those is pretty much how it sounds: body-worn camera, taser deployment log. So this is the actual metadata or data from inside the taser on how it was used. I think that's really important and something I didn't know you could request until recently. Use of force reports and policies. If you live in New Mexico, I've been requesting use of force reports. These are for 2021 and 2022, but I have a whole decade's worth. I think I have those somewhere on Document Cloud. If you're interested in that, send over a Slack message or a message to me in the chat. I'm also going to check the chat for any questions coming through. Vasant, thank you for sharing the document or the slides for today in the chat. But yeah, I have had a lot of these coming in. It was an interesting moment that a lot of people have experienced, which is I filed these like 4 years ago for a whole decade's worth of reports, went back and forth with the officer at the New Mexico State Police for a while, and then didn't hear anything back for several years. And then one day I opened my email and there they all were. That can definitely happen. I think especially it's interesting when that happens, maybe as like the administration or the specific people working at an office changed. So it's always something I've been interested to look into for these requests, like what happened in that time period where I wasn't getting anything and then all of a sudden they came at once. Yeah, use of force reports can be really useful. They include a lot of different information about different arrests. Let's see here if we can find a good example of them. It's me going back and forth. Yeah, here's from 2024. So the information is pretty extensive, as you can see. But again, the thing about different agencies and especially police agencies, how much they vary across the country, the type of information that officers record and when they record them will be different. So it's hard to compare agencies to agencies on the amount of use of force that they use or when they record that information. So now we're at, let's see, incident reports. And actually, I see a question that just came in the chat from Amelia Carlson. If you are able to obtain the Brady list or Giglio list, do they normally give reasons for why officers are on the list? Good question, Amelia. So there's the list itself, which I think some district attorneys do hold just a list, and then there are the materials or the actual files which are the reasons the officer are on the list. Um, it depends, I think. I think that's something that I was just describing with different police agencies, district attorneys do differently because there are these big federal case law or precedents like Brady and Giglio. But I think all states, after a letter, like an Obama era letter, should actually have a form or have a system for how this is done, but not all do. And then not all then counties actually have a system for it. So you may find that they have just the list or they have the list and the materials. But the materials are the really important part. Like you said, they're the reasons why officers are on the list. And the materials would be like the actual disciplinary files, so the incidents and the sustained findings from the incidents. Incident reports, investigative material, 911 response times, art in jail and prison, list of books banned in jail and prison. Those I'm going to just describe what the languages you'll see here. So use of force, we have all current policies maintained regarding use of force. That's pretty simple, right? It sounds complicated to request a policy, but it comes down to pretty simple language. Use of force, this is something that's more specific. It's a specific document that an agency might call one thing or another depending on the agency. So you'll see a use of force report or data report, and there's also a narrative report. This is an instance where having the specific language will get you things quicker. Incident reports, that's pretty simple. Jail complaints, again, sounds complicated, really important, but the simplest way to say it is records related to any complaints made by inmates, their families, or staff members regarding the treatment of inmates. Art in jail or prison, again, this sounds complicated, but the request that was fulfilled here and then shared widely from the work of Jason Leopold was just photographed copies of all artwork created by Guantanamo detainees. Then you have something more specific, like lists of books banned in jail and prison. One way to get at that is the notices of incoming publication denial. So again, that's a very specific form, just like we saw with the roster of forms, and knowing what that form is called, then will give you the actual documents that show which books are being banned, because they're not going to call it a list of banned books, maybe, but they'll have all these notification of incoming publication denials. Talked about these. Gonna keep moving actually. So in between each one, I have just a couple examples of how I use those documents or data, or in this case, body-worn camera in an investigation. I'm not going to go too much into that just to save a little bit of time, but if you want to go back in these slides and check them out, you can find that specific request or the results of that request as it lives in an investigation or in a couple different investigations. This was one of my first like big public records request wins. In 2021, I was working on this investigation about guardianship, and I'd spoken at length to a 91-year-old woman who was in a guardianship that she was really unhappy about, and that her son, who was her only child, didn't know about before all of a sudden she was under the care of someone completely else who had control of all of her finances and different decisions in her life. And she told me about the day that she found out that she got the letter, and she went to court to say, what's going on here? I got this letter that I'm now under a court-appointed guardian. I need to talk to the judge that decided this. What's going on? She said she spoke with an officer, and I didn't know if this officer would actually have turned on his camera during the interaction. But the fact that she just spoke with an officer, even for a short amount of time, seemed important to me. So I requested the body-worn camera. It ended up being really important because she has the letter in her hand as the camera is turned towards her, and she's saying, what's going on? I pay my taxes. I'm a citizen. How did someone take over my whole financial and decision-making life? And you can kind of see the most intense moment of this whole investigation in that body-worn camera. And I remember getting that and being like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I requested that because I thought he probably didn't. This was just like a quick interaction in court. He might have been just an officer that was already assigned to court that day and just, they walked over and had a brief chat with each other. But the body-worn camera ended up being really, really important to the investigation. Behind the badge, that is an example of Brady and Giglio lists. I'm working on this project right now with Sammy Sussman, Annika Grosser, and Sanjana Bambani, who are all reporters in this investigation. And in this case, we're looking at New York City Homeless Service Department officers and the Giglio materials on that agency. Okay, now I'm going to move to the housing section. Again, I'm going to go through these a little bit in cursory and then in more in depth for a few. Eviction lockout notices or case dockets, 311 complaints, complaints to the Attorney General. You're going to see a lot of complaints in here. Complaints are interesting as a public record because they're not sustained as a reporter. You might not be able to immediately report on them, but they're always a good kind of temperature check of potential things you might want to look into in other places. So eviction lockout notices or case dockets. This request that was fulfilled on MuckRock just asked for an eviction list. In reporting that I've done, I've actually scraped case dockets for addresses, but in different parts of the country, evictions are carried out in different ways, and the information recorded on them are different. 311 complaints, if you live in a city, county that has a 311 line, complaints are usually categorized into different subject areas, whether housing or environment, or even just like street parking, these types of things. 311 complaints are always interesting to look at. This complaints to the Attorney General is a request I filed when I was investigating evictions happening in New Mexico. This was something that I didn't fully know there would be these types of complaints at the Attorney General's office, but I thought if there would be a place that was processing some of the more serious complaints, maybe it'd be the Attorney General. And it actually did end up turning back some interesting materials on complaints that they received. Inspections and other reports. That's again really simple language. Violations. I think this is a good example of some very specific language. So notices of violations, stop work orders, inspection notes, or inspection comments. This comes from a request that really obviously understands how this data is recorded inside of the Planning and Building Department of Oakland. It's completed here. You can see the documents that are returned. Your housing authority or planning department may not record things in the same way, but this is as close as you can come to knowing exactly what that employee of the agency is holding in their hand when they're standing and doing an inspection or something like that. What's the form that they're actually filling out. Let's see, rental assistance data. That was helpful in the evictions investigation that I'm going to talk about in a second. Mortgage documents. I once spent about a week at the county clerk's office in Albuquerque looking through mortgage assignments and releases. Those are usually held at like a county clerk or a assessor's office, depending on what it's called. Deeds, you can ask for a property deed or the records of sale or purchase. Again, these are very specific language for a very specific form or document that may change in different states or different counties. Calls for service. Calls for service is always important. That could be related to a specific incident or related to a specific place. For example, when I was reporting on evictions, I had heard from a lot of tenants that there was more crime at this apartment than any other place in Albuquerque, for example. And one way to check that out is to ask for all the calls of service. So all the 911 calls coming from this address from these times. So yeah, illegal notice is the first part in a series about evictions. in New Mexico that I worked on. It is about the apartment complexes in Albuquerque that were illegally evicting people during the CARES Act, when the CARES Act had specified that federally backed properties shouldn't be evicting tenants. So this started as just a tip from an attorney, a legal aid attorney, who said that he had saw multiple clients who lived in apartments that should be backed by the CARES Act. And my first question was, how would I know if this was happening at scale? And so what I did was scrape the eviction case dockets of addresses, and then compare those addresses to the mortgage documents of federally backed mortgages for properties in Albuquerque. And what we found was hundreds of people were evicted illegally at these larger apartment complexes that either the managers didn't know or say they didn't know that they shouldn't have been filing these evictions, but basically continued filing evictions as normal, even though their property was covered under the CARES Act. There's if you're interested in that specifically, we did a tip sheet and guide on using eviction and data and public records to report on housing. We also talk about the rental assistance data, because we then took that eviction data and then connected it to properties that were receiving rental assistance from the federal government, but maybe not telling their tenants about it and still evicting tenants at that time. Environment and health. The great part about the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act in the United States is they specify a lot of different types of documents related to regulation that have trickled down to state and local agencies that they have to produce. This list is a good chunk of them for air quality, but I do think it could be used as well for water quality and waste, because the way that these federal laws trickle down to state and local agencies seems to be pretty standard. So, for example, you have emissions data in the case of air pollution. This comes in annual emission report forms. This request specifically, I think I filed this to either state of Illinois or just one county. Yeah, so this is for the state of Illinois. This is the emissions data for all permit holding properties or permit holding facilities through these specific years. The permits are important because if you're going to be polluting, I think whether water or air, in this case for air as well, you have to let your local environmental agency or your state environmental agency know and say, hey, this is what I'm polluting, this is what equipment I have. And they give you a permit to stay within the levels that the state government or the federal government has set for these specific pollutants. You can also request new source permits, which are when facilities expand. This is a good way to check on like facility creep, like if if a facility moves into your neighborhood and has a very small footprint at first, they're just producing a little bit of plastics, but each year they grow a little bit bigger. Their original permit may have been for a very small amount of pollution, but over time they keep adding equipment and polluting even more. These new source permits kind of show you how a emitter has expanded in a time period. Inspections and violations. In Illinois, these are notices of violations. So all notices of violations issued by the Illinois EPA to Coppers. This is a facility we investigated. Different environmental agencies in different states may call it something else. All enforcement or compliance correspondence. This sounds really broad, but I actually spent several months requesting specific parts of enforcement and compliance, like these inspections and violations, and then was talking with a FOIA officer on the phone, and he said, you could just request this all at once by saying all correspondence related to compliance. And I was like, that's very helpful. I've been searching for the individual documents, but actually you can ask for it in an even more broad way. And that was kind of surprising to me because, like we said at the beginning of the call, and I keep repeating, it's important to be as specific as possible. But in this case, a FOIA officer for an agency was telling me I can be more general and just get all the documents I'm looking for at once, rather than requesting them bit by bit for each inspection and each response to an inspection, and each, part of the back and forth. Again, complaints to 311 are always important. Environmental impact statements, these are kind of the core of environmental law in the United States in a lot of ways. So when a facility is proposed in an area, these types of impact statements or reviews are often required by different state or local governments, and they assess what the environmental damage could be. Exceptional events, I'm going to talk about those in a second. And contracts, this is, again, more specific language, all executed contracts, memorandums, or other equivalent of agreements that are active or have been active within the last 5 years. Death records data, not all states will provide you with death records data, but there are a handful that will and that do maintain a full database. For example, Minnesota has a very extensive database of all death records in the state. So you should check the laws in your state if you're interested in anything to do with death records that could be useful. For example, taking a look at maternal mortality or overdose deaths. Those are things that you can get in autopsy reports, but you may also be able to get the higher level death records data. I'm going to check the chat. Okay, it's Adrian following up on that conversation. I'll come back to that at the end. Available childcare slots. Again, here's something very specific, asking for the license capacity of programs by zip code. That helped us then compare the amount of childcare that there could actually, that the county or the zip code could actually handle, with the amount of children, according to the census, that there actually are that could be in childcare. And doing that, we were able to identify specific childcare deserts where there was much more, there were many more children than there were childcare slots. Again, I'm going to keep pushing forward and leave these for you all to check out. These are 2 investigations that used a lot of the environmental public records requests that I just mentioned. Here's what a notice of violations looks like, what the air emissions inventory looks like. And then when we started mapping that and see if it's not, then connecting it back to this one polluter in Cicero, Illinois, which we cover in the investigation. So we keep moving. Exceptional events. This was really interesting, a good FOIA story, I think, because I originally noticed a column in some EPA data that indicated data that was not calculated in the other part of the data that I was measuring. And I was like, why are they removing some of the data, or why are they indicating that this is not the entire measurement that I'm seeing? And we eventually followed that string far enough to realize that that state governments can ask for certain data to be excluded from their annual calculations by arguing in a what's called a demonstration or exceptional event demonstration that the air pollution was high on a specific day because of wildfires, for example, rather than local polluters. So that was a really long journey. It started with just one column of data, wondering what that could possibly mean, to finding out that there's this whole sort of system for excluding certain types of data, and it's documented by the EPA in really extensive ways through these long PDFs of arguments of saying you should exclude or include this much data for our annual calculations. Keep moving. This is about an investigation we did into long COVID, and that's what an actual death certificate looks like. Politics, we've talked about these recently on FOIA Fridays, or some of these items recently. Calendars, gifts, travel, voter history, military personnel records. Calendars, that's really simple. A lot of the time you're really just asking for their calendar, not their public calendar, but just the full calendar of the political official or the elected official. Gifts, I think this is a great, very basic requests for gifts, just an electronic spreadsheet listing all gifts received by this mayor. Travel, this is a good example of where it gets a little bit more complicated. In California, these are called Form 700 filings. In different states, they'll be called different things. But elected officials depending on where you live in different states, have to file this once a year, or a similar form once a year, where they disclose their personal finances in different parts of their doings in the office, including their travel. This is a really great example of collecting that data from these Form 700s by Cal Matters. You can go scroll down to the bottom of the GitHub to see some of the stories that came out of it. But that's something that you find on a very specific form. Voter history and data extract. This is a good example of something very specific. Again, this is one candidate's voting history. You can see what registered party she was and what time period and when she voted or if she voted. This was obtained through the New York State Board of Elections by asking for their voter data extract of a single person. And in doing so, we were able to say this is how long they've been a registered Democrat, and this is their voting history in this time period. Here's one of the Cal Matters story that makes use of the gifts and travel data. Sports are always fun. You may not think there's a lot of good requests you can find in the sports world, but there definitely are. You can ask for your mayor or governor's box suites. You can find out what petitions or what presentations are being made to build new stadiums, contracts for coaches at public universities. This one I think is really interesting. You can find out what expense reports were filed for college sports teams as they travel. I think it'd be really interesting to see which college sports teams are spending the most on hotel and travel costs as they're traveling. And then, of course, contracts and ticket sales, especially for public colleges and universities. This request has some very specific language for booking contracts, final ticket sales, and final event costs paid by the licensee. So there's always fun and interesting things to find there. Lastly, or before I get to that, I guess here's a good example of the Mayor's Box tickets. This is an article I think lots of local news are happy to do often to see who's getting tickets in the mayor or the governor's box. And lastly, we have Meta. So these are the kind of requests that generate more requests. You can request emails mentioning your name or newsroom to an agency after you've already filed a request at that agency. You can request data inventories, which are very similar to rosters of forms, FOIA logs, which is a log of all requests made at that agency for a time period, records retention schedules, which are how long the agency maintains different records so that you understand if you're asking for something from 20 years ago, if they really still have that record, or if they remove or get rid of that data, destroy that data at some point. And then annual reports. Yeah, we're about 5 minutes over time and try to blaze through all of those. I think the emails mentioning your name or newsroom can be especially interesting. We were, as I said earlier, working on this investigation into a industrial facility called Koppers in Cicero, Illinois, with a newsroom called Cicero Independiente. And after we published our initial investigations, I filed a request for emails that mentioned either Koppers, pollution, violation independiente, or MuckRock between the town president and other members of the town board. And my request was initially rejected. They said they had 9 emails, but that was too many emails to review and redact. So I appealed this. We won the appeal. We eventually did obtain the emails, and the emails showed that the company Koppers had reached out to the town president or to the president and board members of a local town nearby, where the facility actually lies directly and not just on the boundary to. And basically trying to convene a secret meeting called a community advisory panel that they actually didn't notify the community at all about. It was just a few selected public officials or important people in other offices in the community, and then the corporation itself. And they wanted to convene this meeting without actually notifying the public in any way. So yeah, I know that was quick. I hope there was still enough useful items there that you could soak up and file on your own. But that is 50 FOIAs in 35, 40 minutes. Um, I know we're well over time, but if anyone else has any questions or things they want to talk about to round out the day, I will hang on for a little bit and chat. Thanks all for going through that with me. If there are any topics you're interested in that I didn't talk about, or any feedback on what to include in this type of session later on, also let me know. Hit me up over email in the MuckRock Slack, or we can talk on the call. I'm going to stop recording and officially end FOIA Friday for today.